They took her idea again, not borrowed it, not misquoted it, took it word for word, and stood in that glass boardroom presenting it like they had dreamed it up in their sleep, while Nia Brooks sat 3 rows back, invisible, her name never once crossing their lips. That was the 4th time in 14 months. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She simply opened her desk drawer that evening, pulled out the resignation letter she had written and rewritten 6 times, and finally, decided she was going to deliver it. What she didn't know was that somewhere on the 32nd floor, behind a door no one on her pay grade had ever knocked on, a man had been watching every single one of those 14 months. And he had already decided she wasn't going anywhere. If someone had already mapped out your future before you even realized yours had been stolen, what would you do? If you're watching this and that question just hit somewhere real, stay with us until the end. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what's coming next, and hit that like button right now. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the night it all changed. The rain that night came down like the city was trying to wash something off itself. Seoul in November had a particular kind of cold, not the kind that just touched your skin, but the kind that got underneath it, settled in your chest, made breathing feel like a small act of effort. Nia Brooks pulled her coat tighter as she stepped off the subway at Gangnam Station, her bag hanging heavy on her shoulder, the resignation letter folded inside it in a plain white envelope with no name on the front because she still hadn't decided if she was brave enough to hand it to someone in person or just leave it on a desk and walk out. 4 years. 4 years of early mornings and late nights and skipped lunches and ideas, good ideas, real ideas, the kind that changed the direction of quarterly projections and reshaped client acquisition strategies, offered up freely, documented carefully, submitted through the proper internal channels, and then quietly absorbed into the bloodstream of people who never once acknowledged where they came from. She had counted, in a little notebook she kept in the side pocket of that same bag. 31 documented instances. 31 times her work had moved upward through the Bake Dragon Group's corporate hierarchy under someone else's name. Her supervisor, Director Choi Jun-seo, led the list with 19. His deputy, a thin-mouthed woman named Park Soo-young, accounted for 9. The remaining 3 were opportunistic, junior managers who had learned, apparently, that Nia's desk was an open resource. She was not invisible by accident. She had been made invisible deliberately, systematically, by people who understood that the easiest way to steal from someone was to first convince everyone around them, including that person, that they didn't quite belong. It was a sophisticated cruelty. It didn't announce itself. It came in small packages. The meeting she wasn't invited to, the email chain she was CC'd on only after the decision had already been made, the colleague who looked straight through her in the elevator, the offhand comment at the company dinner. She's competent, I suppose, for someone in a support role, delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Nia had a master's degree in strategic business management from Georgetown. She spoke 3 languages, English, French, and functional Korean, which had improved considerably over 4 years of survival necessity. She had scored in the 94th percentile on the Bake Dragon Group's internal strategic assessment. She knew this because she had helped design the assessment rubric, though the HR documentation listed Director Choi as its primary architect. She pushed through the revolving glass doors of the Bake Dragon headquarters building. The lobby at 9:15 on a Tuesday night was quiet. The daytime army of suited professionals had retreated hours ago. A security guard she recognized, older man, always had a thermos of something hot, never made eye contact with anyone, glanced up from behind his station, registered her familiar face, and looked back down. She took the elevator. She had intended in her original plan to go to the 23rd floor, her floor. Leave the envelope on Director Choi's desk, collect her personal items, walk out. Clean, quiet, no scene. Her finger hovered over the button for the 23rd floor. Then she pressed 32. She wasn't entirely sure why. Or maybe she was, and couldn't quite admit it yet. The 32nd floor was Kang Tae-hyun's floor, CEO, chairman. The name on the building, literally, not Bake Dragon. That was the conglomerate's formal designation, but everyone in the industry understood that the Bake Dragon Group was Kang Tae-hyun. Had been his father's before him, and his grandfather's before that, Though the grandfather was long dead, and the father had been gone for 11 years, and no one in the company spoke about the circumstances of that in any detail. Nia had seen Kang Tae-hyun exactly 11 times in 4 years. She had counted those too, though she hadn't written them in the notebook. Those she had kept somewhere more private. He was 37. Not conventionally handsome in the way that demanded attention immediately. His was a face that revealed itself slowly, like something you had to stand in front of long enough for your eyes to adjust. Angular and still, with a quality of absolute composure that she had initially read as arrogance, and later, over 4 years of careful, distant observation, revised to something more complicated. He moved through his own building the way water moves through a pipe, without friction, without waste. His voice, on the rare occasions she had been near enough to hear it, was low and unhurried. He did not perform authority. He simply had it, the way some people have height. She had never spoken to him directly. She had handed him a folder once in a conference room when his assistant was occupied and someone needed to pass documents around. He had taken it without looking at her. So why 32? The elevator opened. The floor was dim, the kind of dim that wasn't accidental, that came from a specific lighting choice, low and amber at the edges of the corridor, the kind of light that didn't strain the eyes after midnight, but made everything feel like it was happening inside a pause. His assistant's station, a wide mahogany desk stationed before a set of double doors, was empty. Of course it was empty. It was 9:15 on a Tuesday. Nia stood in the hallway for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. She could hear, faintly, through the double doors, the sound of someone moving, not pacing, just the small sounds of a person in a room, the soft drag of a chair, the quiet weight of something being set on a hard surface. She raised her hand, knocked. Silence. Then, "Come in." 2 words, low, not surprised. She opened the door. The office was large without trying to announce that it was large. One entire wall was glass, floor to ceiling, the width of the room. And beyond it, Seoul spread out in wet neon and scattered white light, the rain turning every street lamp into something that bled color downward onto the pavement. He was standing at that window when she entered, his back partially to her, a glass of something amber in his left hand. He turned when he heard the door. He looked at her. Not the way people in this building usually looked at her, past her, or at some point slightly beside her head. The particular social technique of treating a person like furniture. He looked directly at her, with a steadiness that was immediately disorienting, the way it's disorienting to speak to someone who is actually listening. "Ms. Brooks," he said. She had not told him her name. She had never spoken to this man in 4 years. He said her name like it was something he had known for a long time and was simply choosing to say out loud now. Her carefully rehearsed composure wobbled slightly. She tightened her grip on her bag strap. "I have a resignation letter," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I was going to leave it downstairs, but I thought—" She stopped. Thought what? She didn't have a clean answer for that. "I thought it should be handed to someone who might actually notice I was gone." He didn't react to that the way she expected. He didn't apologize, didn't perform discomfort, didn't manufacture the particular kind of corporate sympathy that felt like being handed a paper towel when you were drowning. He set his glass down on the edge of his desk. "Sit down," he said. "I'm not staying," she said. "Sit down, Ms. Brooks." It wasn't a request the second time either, but it also wasn't aggressive. It was simply the voice of someone who said things once and then waited for the world to arrange itself accordingly. Against what felt like the better instincts of her nervous system, she sat. He crossed the room and settled into the chair behind his desk. Not the power position lean that people in his kind of role sometimes performed, elbows wide, filling space. He sat like a man who was tired and had decided to be tired honestly. He opened his hand. "Give me the letter." She pulled it from her bag and set it on the desk between them. He picked it up. "Read it." Not skim read, actually read it, his eyes moving line by line. She had the strange sensation of being genuinely assessed, which was different from being evaluated, which was different from being scrutinized. Assessment required the other person to be actually present. He was. Then he did something she hadn't prepared for. He tore it in half. Not dramatically, not with anger. He tore it the way you tear a piece of paper that has served its purpose. Clean, decisive, 2 pieces placed neatly on the desk in front of him. Nia stared at it. I'm not accepting that, he said. You can't. She stopped. She actually wasn't sure what the legal parameter was for an executive refusing a written resignation. You can't just. That's my decision to make. It is, he said. And you haven't made it yet. You came to 32 instead of leaving it on Choi's desk, which means some part of you is still deciding. She hated that he was right. She hated that he had seen it that clearly in approximately 45 seconds. What I came here to say, she said, keeping her voice measured, is that this company has taken 4 years of my best work, credited it to other people, and spent considerable energy ensuring I understand I'm replaceable. That's not a workplace problem I haven't tried to solve. I filed 3 internal complaints. I documented everything. Nothing changed, so I'm leaving. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone formulating a response, the quiet of someone who already has one and is deciding whether the timing is right. I know about the complaints, he said. I know they were buried. I know who buried them and why. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to change the geometry of the conversation. I know about your Georgetown assessment scores. I know about the Q2 client retention model you built that Choi presented to the Tokyo office. I know about the restructuring proposal that Park ran as her own in front of the Singapore board. I know about the 23 others before those. Naya's hands had gone still in her lap. I've known for over a year, he said. The city hummed and glittered behind him through the rain-streaked glass. Then why, she said carefully, didn't you do anything? I was building a case. His voice didn't change. In my experience, Ms. Brooks, catching someone in the act is satisfying but temporary. What you build against them document by document has to be so complete that when it moves, it cannot be undone. I was waiting until it was complete. She looked at him, at this man she had watched from a distance for 4 years, this man whose name was on the building, whose company had spent 4 years eating her alive, who was now sitting across from her telling her he had been watching, that he had been protecting something, that he had seen her this entire time. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure if she believed it. Why? She asked. Why does it matter what happens to me? He was quiet again. The question didn't seem to embarrass him. Because what you've produced in 4 years, under conditions that were deliberately designed to limit you, is extraordinary. And because the people stealing from you are costing this organization more than they're contributing to it. Both things are true. I don't separate them. She should have said something then, but the 4 years were suddenly sitting very close to the surface. The lunches eaten alone, the meeting room she hadn't been invited into, the small daily erosion of being treated like a mistake someone was too polite to correct. Her throat was doing something she didn't want it to do. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Your resignation is refused, he said. Starting Monday, you're reassigned. Personal executive secretary and strategic advisor to this office. Direct report to me, no intermediaries. Full authority to access internal documentation, flag anomalies, sit in on any meeting across any division. He paused. And your name will be on everything you produce, from this point forward. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the silence of confrontation, the silence of a door having swung open and both of them standing at its threshold. I don't know if I trust you, she said. You don't have to yet, he said. That's honest. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the rain pressed against the glass, and Seoul kept moving the way cities do. Indifferent, relentless, alive. And somewhere on the 23rd floor in a dark office, a resignation letter that no longer existed had already begun to change the shape of everything that came next. Nia picked up her bag. Monday, she said. He nodded once. She stood, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back because there was one thing she needed to say and she didn't know if she'd ever have the nerve again. 4 years, she said quietly. That's a long time to watch someone get taken apart and not say anything. He held her gaze. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly. More like acknowledgement. The kind a person makes when they can't argue with what's true. Yes, he said. It is. She left. The elevator took her back down through 32 floors of a company that was, as of that moment, no longer quite the same place she had entered. She walked out through the lobby, past the security guard and his thermos, into the cold Seoul rain. Her hands were shaking, but she wasn't quitting. Monday came the way uncomfortable things tend to come, faster than you're ready for, with no particular concern for your readiness. Nia arrived at 7:42 in the morning. She had intended to arrive at 8, but she'd been awake since 4:30, lying in the dark of her Mapogu apartment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that she'd never gotten around to reporting to her landlord, running through every possible version of how the day could go wrong. By 6, she was dressed. By 6:15, she was on the subway, 20 minutes too early, standing in a half-empty car watching the tunnel walls blur past. She wore the charcoal blazer. Not because it was her favorite, it wasn't, but because it had proper structure to it, the kind that made her shoulders look like a decision rather than an apology. The lobby security guard, the one with the thermos, looked up when she came through the doors. He registered something, a flicker of recalibration, the way people look when a familiar face appears in an unfamiliar context. She had always come in through the side entrance, the one the administrative staff used. Today she walked straight through the main doors, crossed the marble floor, and pressed the button for 32. He watched her go. She didn't look back. The elevator opened on 32 and a woman was already there. Mid-40s, a structured bun so precise it looked architectural, a tablet under one arm, and the particular expression of someone who had been briefed on a situation and had formed opinions about it before the meeting was over. She was standing at the assistant's desk, and she looked up when Nia stepped off the elevator. "Miss Brooks." Her voice was professionally neutral in the way that is its own kind of hostility. "I'm Ji-won, Mr. Kang's senior coordinator. I'll show you to your office." Her office. It was a room she'd walked past 4 years of her working life without ever going inside, adjacent to Tae-hyun's outer suite, glass-fronted but with a privacy panel, large enough to hold a real desk and a meeting table for 4. There was a laptop on the desk, a Beck Dragon Group keycard in a small envelope with her name typed on the front, and nothing else. No flowers, no welcome card, no performative warmth. She appreciated that. "Mr. Kong has a 7:30 internal review that's running long," Ji-won said, setting the tablet on the table. "When it ends, he'll call you in. Until then, your access credentials are active. You can begin familiarizing yourself with the current division reports." "All of them?" Nia asked. "All of them." Ji-won left. Nia sat down at the desk, opened the laptop, and pulled up the division access portal. She was looking at the internal architecture of a company she'd worked inside for 4 years and had never actually seen before. Financial projections, board minutes, quarterly assessments, cross-division communication logs, contractor agreements, international partnership documentation. Not the sanitized summaries that circulated to her floor. The actual documents. The ones with the real numbers and the real names and, as she quickly began to understand, the real discrepancies. She found the first one inside 11 minutes. A line item in the Southeast Asia contractor reports, buried in an appendix, flagged internally as a standard vendor payment, attributed to a logistics company called Hallam Pacific. The amount was not unusual. The company name was familiar in the abstract sense. But the documentation trail ended 6 weeks before the payment cleared, and the contact signatory on the vendor agreement was a name she recognized, not from official company records, but from a company-wide email that Director Choi Jun-seo had sent 2 years ago announcing a new external partnership, a partnership that had never been mentioned again. She opened a fresh document and began writing. She didn't hear the door open, didn't register the sound at first because she was inside the work the way she got inside work, when something real was pulling at her, fully, almost physically, the rest of the world going slightly out of focus. "You're early." His voice. She looked up. Tae-hyun was standing in the doorway between the outer suite and her office, still in his jacket from whatever meeting had just ended, his tie loosened a single inch, the only evidence of any kind of concession to the hour. He looked at the screen, then at the notes she'd already made in the document. 11 minutes, she said. For what? To find something that shouldn't be there. She turned the screen so he could see it. Hallam Pacific. Contractor vendor payment, Southeast Asia Division. The trail goes cold before the payment clears. The signatory name on the agreement is someone Choi brought in externally 2 years ago and then never mentioned again. He came into the room, stood at the edge of the desk, not invading the space, just close enough to read the screen properly. She could hear him breathing, slow, even. I know about Hallam Pacific, he said. She looked at him. It's one of the threads, he said. One of several. Don't file anything on it yet. Don't flag it internally. If they know you've seen it, he stopped. Rethought the phrasing. If they know you're looking, they'll bury the rest. She sat back in her chair. The implication of what he wasn't saying was settling over her like cold water. How many people in this building, she said slowly, know about whatever you're building? 2, he said. Now 3. She let that land. Okay, she said. Then I need you to understand something. I'm not a plant. I'm not an operative. I'm a strategist, and I'm good at what I do. And if you want me in this, I need to actually be in it, which means I need to understand the full scope, not just the pieces you decide to hand me as you go. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted, recalibrated. I'll have a file on your desk by end of day, he said. Then he went back through the door to his office, and she turned to her screen, and the day began in earnest. It took 48 hours for word to move. She had expected it, the news of her reassignment traveling at the particular velocity of corporate gossip, which is faster than any official announcement and significantly less accurate. By Wednesday morning, when she stepped off the elevator on 32 with a coffee in one hand and her access key in the other, she already knew from 3 separate secondhand reports that the version circulating on the floors below bore only passing resemblance to what had actually happened. The version on 23, her old floor, Choi's domain, was that Nia had manipulated her way into the CEO's attention through methods that the tellers of this particular story described with various degrees of insinuation, all of them unpleasant, none of them specific enough to be actionable. The version on 18, the senior management floor, was that Kong Tai-hyun had lost perspective on a subordinate employee, which implied something about his judgment, which was spoken in the low, careful voices of people who understood that criticizing the man who owned the building required a degree of plausible deniability. The version that Park Soo-young told, and Nia knew it was Park because she recognized the particular rhetorical fingerprints, was that there were integrity concerns about the strategic documents on Nia's old desk, that certain files had gone missing, that there were questions the relevant parties would be asking. That one arrived via Ji-won, who appeared in Nia's doorway on Wednesday afternoon with the expression of someone delivering news they weren't sure how to classify. I thought you should know what's being said, Ji-won said. I appreciate it, Nia said. She kept her voice even. Is this the version that made it back to Mr. Kong? I don't know what Mr. Kong knows. He knows, Nia said. Partly because she had already learned in 3 days that very little moved through this building without Tae-hyun having some awareness of it, and partly because she had read enough of the file he'd sent to understand that the people generating these rumors had been watched for significantly longer than she had. Ji-won looked at her for a moment, then, I'll let you know if anything else comes up. She left. Nia put her coffee down, pulled up the internal communications log, and went back to work. The confrontation she had been expecting arrived on Thursday. She was in the 3rd floor archive room, a physical archive, the kind with actual paper, which still existed in this building, because certain contracts predated digital record keeping and hadn't been transferred officially for reasons she was beginning to understand were not bureaucratic laziness when she heard the door open behind her. She knew who it was before she turned around. She recognized the footsteps. 4 years had given her an involuntary familiarity with the rhythms of the people who had made her life difficult. Director Choi Jun-seo was 51, silver at the temples, the kind of man who had grown into his authority so gradually that he'd forgotten there was ever a time when he hadn't had it. He was not physically imposing. He was the other kind of imposing, the kind built from the accumulated weight of being consistently unchallenged. He closed the archive room door. Ms. Brooks, he said, Director Choi. She set the folder she was holding down on the table, face down, and turned to face him. She did not sit. She didn't have a height advantage on him, but she wasn't going to manufacture a disadvantage. This is a surprise, he said. His tone was the corporate version of casual, which was its own kind of threat. I wasn't aware you had clearance for the physical archives. I have clearance for everything, she said. He smiled. The smile was practiced. I see. So this promotion, that's what we're calling it, is quite comprehensive. Is there something you need, Director? The smile held, but something behind it went still. I want you to understand something, Nia. Her first name. A deliberate reduction. Whatever you think is happening here, whatever Kang Tae-hyun has told you or led you to believe, this organization has a long institutional memory. People who arrive in positions they haven't earned through the standard pathways tend to find that the organization eventually corrects those arrangements. She held his gaze. Her pulse was doing something unsteady in her throat, but her face wasn't. She had practiced her face in situations like this for 4 years. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm offering perspective," he said, "from someone who's been here considerably longer than you have." "Then here's mine," she said. "I have been here 4 years. In those 4 years, I have produced 31 documented strategic contributions that were submitted under my name through internal channels and presented by other people without credit or attribution. 23 of those were by your hand or direction." She kept her voice level, not raised, not aggressive, just accurate. "I'm not threatening you either, Director. I'm offering the same thing you offered me. Perspective." The smile was gone now. He looked at her for a long moment, a measuring look, the kind that was calculating and reassessing at the same time. "Be careful," he said. Quiet. Meaning precisely what it said. Then he left. Nia stood in the archive room until she heard his footsteps disappear down the hall. Then she sat down on the nearest chair and breathed for 30 seconds. Just breathed, letting the adrenaline work its way out through her hands, which were trembling slightly against the edge of the table. Then she picked up the folder, noted the conversation in the small separate document she'd begun keeping on a personal drive, and went back to work, she told Taehyun that evening. Not immediately. She worked until 7, then knocked on the inner door of his office because the light under it was still on, which she had learned in 3 days was not unusual. He was at his desk reading something that he closed when she came in, a motion so automatic she almost missed it. She told him about the archive room. Verbatim, as close as she could reconstruct. She was good at reconstructing conversations. She watched his face while she did it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He came alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Not Park?" "No." He nodded once, slowly, like something had been confirmed rather than revealed. "He's rattled. They weren't expecting the pace of your access. They thought they'd have more time to build something before you got close to anything relevant." "The Hallam Pacific documents," she said, "among others." He leaned back. "You handled it correctly. The fact that you didn't confirm or deny knowledge of anything specific, that matters." She sat down in the chair across from him, which she'd done twice before, and both times it had felt slightly presumptuous. This time it felt like a reasonable thing to do, and she did it without deliberating about it first, which was its own small shift in the internal geography between them. "How close is it?" she asked. "The case. How close?" "Closer now that you're inside it." He paused. "There are 4 active threads. Hallam Pacific is one. There's a contract irregularity in the Tokyo office dating back 3 years that connects to a board member I can't move against without the Singapore documentation, which I'm still waiting on. The third is internal, a pattern of forged metadata on the documents that were presented as Choi's work, which we can now trace back to the originals because we have the originals." A pause. "Your originals. The proposals you submitted. The timestamps are still intact on the source files." She stared at him. "They forged the metadata on the copies they presented." "Yes." "And the source files still exist?" "Yes." "In the archive." "In the archive," he said, "which is why I needed you to be able to access it, and why Choi showing up there today tells me they know the source files are a problem." The shape of it was settling over her. The full architecture of what had been happening, not just to her but around her, the way her situation had been both a symptom of a larger rot, and apparently a piece that Tae-hyun had been waiting to place in a specific position. "And the 4th thread?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of someone deciding something. "The 4th thread," he said, "involves someone on the board. Someone who has been providing external parties with advanced knowledge of Bayek Dragon Group's strategic movements for approximately 4 years. She understood what he was not saying. "That's why the Singapore deal had problems," she said. It wasn't a question. She had read enough in the last 3 days to understand that a major international partnership from 18 months ago had collapsed in a way that the official record described as a market conditions issue, which was the corporate equivalent of a bruise labeled a door frame. That's why several deals had problems, he said. He was looking at her directly. I need you to understand what you're inside, Ms. Brooks. This is not a standard corporate investigation. The people in this network have external relationships that I am not going to detail for you right now, because if something goes wrong, the less you know about the external structure. Stop, she said. He stopped. Don't protect me from information I need, she said. If I'm inside this, I'm inside it. The same information that keeps you safe keeps me safe. Protecting me from it does the opposite. He looked at her. She met his gaze and didn't look away. The board member, he said finally, has a relationship with a competitor organization, one that operates outside the legitimate corporate space. They've been feeding strategic intelligence for financial compensation for 4 years. When I move against Choi and Park, that board member will know within hours, which means I cannot move against Choi and Park until I can move against the board member simultaneously. And you can't move against the board member without the Singapore documentation, which arrives, he said, in approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She sat with that for a moment. 3 weeks of being inside this building, visible, working from the 32nd floor, while the people who had already tried to erase her for 4 years understood that she was now in a position to do them actual damage. 3 weeks is a long time, she said. It is, he said, which is why we need to be very careful about what you touch, what you access, and what you say to anyone in this building who is not me or Ji-won. She nodded, stood up. She was at the door when he said her name. Ms. Brooks. She turned. I should have moved sooner, he said. It wasn't an apology exactly. It was something more stripped down than that. Just a man saying a true thing without dressing it up. She held his gaze for a moment. Yes, she said. You should have. She left. The next 10 days moved in a rhythm she had not expected. Not chaotic, but pressurized, the way the air gets before a storm, when the pressure drops, and every sound seems slightly too loud, and every silence slightly too long. She worked. She documented. She learned the shape of the company the way you learn the layout of a building in the dark, through repeated contact with its edges. She sat in on meetings she had never been permitted near, watched how information moved and where it slowed, began to understand which rooms were safe and which ones had ears that reported somewhere she couldn't see. She ate lunch at her desk most days because the executive floor dining room was a social landscape she hadn't fully mapped yet, and she didn't have the bandwidth to be strategic about it on top of everything else. She made one mistake. Not a catastrophic one, but the kind that has a cost. On the 9th day, she ran into Park Soo-young in the lobby elevator bank. Park was 54, composed in the way that comes from decades of understanding exactly which rooms you need to be seen in and exactly which version of yourself to perform in each. She had the particular elegance of a woman who had spent a career in environments that required constant self-monitoring and had made a kind of art out of the effort. Nia had spent 9 months working 3 desks away from her on 23 and had never once had a direct conversation with her. The elevator came. They both got in. The doors closed. I heard you settled in well on 32, Park said. Neutral. The complete surface of a phrase, nothing visible underneath. I have, Nia said, matching the tone. Exact. It's a different world up there. A pause. Different pressures. I imagine. Mr. Kong is an exacting man, Park said. People who work closely with him often find the experience, a small, careful pause. Clarifying. Nia looked at the elevator doors. Is that what they find? Some stay, Park said. Some find that the position isn't quite what they expected it to be, that there are aspects of the role they weren't prepared for. The elevator opened on 32. Nia stepped out. She turned back because something in the quality of Park's voice had shifted in the last exchange. Something under the smoothness, the faintest edge of something that wasn't a warning so much as a calibration. The way a person sounds when they are telling you something true through the shape of a thing that isn't. Ms. Park, Nia said, if you have something to say to me, I'm easier to reach than Mr. Kang. Park looked at her, a long, measuring look. Something moved in her expression that Nia couldn't entirely read. Not quite regret, not quite threat. Something in the contested territory between them. The elevator doors closed. Nia stood in the corridor for a moment, turning the conversation over. She should have let it go. She should have been opaque, which was the instruction, or the implication of the instruction, which was, give them nothing. She had given Park something, not information, but visibility, the visibility of being willing to meet directly. She wasn't sure yet if it mattered. She wrote it in the document that evening anyway. What she didn't write, what she didn't tell Tae-hyun, was that in the moment the elevator doors closed, something about Park Soo-young's expression had troubled her in a way she couldn't name cleanly. It had not looked like a predator checking on its prey. It had looked, for just a second, like someone who was themselves frightened and making a calculation about which direction was safer. She didn't write it because she wasn't sure enough of it. But she didn't forget it either. The Singapore documentation arrived 17 days early. She was at her desk at 11:15 on a Wednesday night. Tae-hyun was still in his office. She could see the light. When Ji-won, who had no reason to still be in the building at this hour, appeared in her doorway with a USB drive in her hand and an expression that had dropped all its professional architecture. "He needs to see you," Ji-won said. "Both of you, now." Nia followed her. Tae-hyun was standing when they came in, which she'd never seen before. He was always seated or at the window, never just standing in the middle of the room, unanchored. He had the drive connected to his laptop. The screen faced them when she came around the desk. She looked at it. Then she understood why Ji-won's face looked the way it did. The Singapore documentation wasn't just a contract irregularity, it was a complete record. Communications, wire transfers, meeting logs. A file assembled apparently by someone inside the Singapore office, who had been building it for a year and a half, and had now decided that the moment to send it was tonight. Of not one board member's involvement, but three. 3 board members. A systematic intelligence pipeline operating inside Bake Dragon Group's highest governance structure, feeding strategic information to a competitor organization that was, and this was the part that changed the temperature of the room, not simply a corporate competitor. She looked at Tae-hyun. His face was still. The particular stillness she had learned in 3.5 weeks was not composure, but something harder. The expression of a man who had suspected something and is now looking at the confirmation and allowing himself exactly as many seconds as it takes to process before moving to what comes next. "They're going to know it arrived," she said. "Yes," he said. "How long do we have before they know you have it?" "Hours," he said. "Maybe less." She looked at the screen again. The full weight of it. Not just the corruption, not just the scale, but the immediacy. The fact that the 3-week window had just collapsed to nothing was landing in her chest with a physical quality, a pressure behind the sternum. "Then we can't wait," she said. "No," he said. "We can't." He looked at her across the desk. His eyes were steady and direct, and what was in them was not calm. It was the thing past calm, the thing that comes when a person has already processed the fear and come out on the other side into something that moves with absolute deliberateness. "The executive summit is in 11 days, he said. "The full board, all division heads, international partners. It was supposed to happen after we moved." "And now?" she said. "Now," he said. "It's the only place we can move." She held his gaze. The rain was back outside. Seoul going quiet at this hour, the city exhaling, the streets below wet and amber and empty. 11 days. Board members who now had every reason to move first. A building full of people who had spent 4 years either stealing from her or watching it happen. And one man across a desk who had decided, apparently, that the safest place for her was also the center of what was coming. She pulled out a chair and sat down. "Then we have 11 days, she said. "Tell me everything." 11 days felt like a number with weight to it when Tae-hyun said it across that desk at 11:15 at night. It felt like enough, like a container that could hold what needed to be done. By morning, it felt like nothing at all. Nia was back at her desk by 6:30. She had gone home, slept 3 hours in her coat, woken up at 5 with the specific alertness of someone whose nervous system had decided that rest was a secondary concern. She showered, changed, took the early subway. The city was still gray and half asleep when she came through the lobby. The security guard with the thermos was just arriving for his shift. He held the door. She had a legal pad on her desk within 10 minutes, filled in her own handwriting. Not typed, not on any networked system, with the 11-day structure she and Tae-hyun had mapped out the night before. The plan had a logic to it. Not a comfortable logic, not the kind that left much room for error, but a logic. The executive summit was a fixed event. 2 days, full board attendance, division heads, international partners, the kind of gathering that couldn't be moved without generating exactly the kind of visibility they couldn't afford. Taehyun's intention was to use the summit itself as the mechanism, not to expose the board members privately behind closed doors in the controlled way that could be managed and suppressed, publicly, in front of the people whose presence made suppression impossible. For that to work, Nia needed to be the one standing at the front of the room, not Taehyun, not Jiwon, her. The reasoning was cold, and it was correct. If Taehyun moved against his own board directly, it read as internal power consolidation, the kind of thing that made international partners nervous and gave lawyers leverage. But if the evidence was presented by his strategic advisor, someone with documented standing, documented credentials, documented injury, it became something else. It became a governance issue, a transparency moment, the kind of thing that institutional partners were required by their own charters to take seriously. It put her in the center of the room at the moment of maximum exposure. She had agreed to it. She was not, in the clear light of a 6:30 morning, entirely sure why she had agreed to it, except that when he laid it out the night before, it had felt like the only thing that made sense, and she had learned over 3.5 weeks that his reasoning, when she could trace its full architecture, tended to hold. She trusted that. She was still deciding how she felt about the fact that she trusted it. The first 4 days were preparation. Nia pulled documentation with a precision that felt almost surgical. Source files, timestamps, communication logs. The forged metadata comparison that showed, in exact and verifiable detail, how her proposals had been stripped of their identifying information and reattributed. Jiwon, who had turned out to be a more complex figure than Nia had initially read her, worked the Singapore documentation, cross-referencing wire transfers, building a chronological map of the intelligence pipeline that was clean enough to present to a room full of lawyers without a single ambiguous inference. Taehyun worked the board member problem. Nia didn't know exactly how. He didn't detail it and she didn't ask, because she had learned in 4 days of close proximity that there were rooms in his operational world that he was not yet ready to show her, and she had decided, not without some internal friction, that pushing on those doors before he was ready to open them was a tactical error. She needed his trust to stay intact. She had very little margin for actions that eroded it. On the 5th day, Choi moved. She heard it from Jiwon at 8:15 in the morning, not directly, but through the particular language of someone relaying information they found alarming and are trying to do so in a way that doesn't itself become alarming. An internal audit request had been filed with the governance committee. The stated subject was the integrity of documentation on the 32nd floor. The requesting party was listed as a committee of concerned senior directors. The committee was Choi and Park. And as Jiwon noted with a flatness in her voice that said more than the words, one board member whose name Nia recognized from the Singapore documentation. They're trying to trigger an independent review, Nia said. Before the summit, Jiwon confirmed, which would give them access to everything we've assembled, or the authority to have it quarantined. Nia sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. Then she stood up and went to Taehyun's door and knocked. He was on a call. He looked up when she opened the door, read her expression, said something brief into the phone, and ended it. She told him. He listened. His jaw moved once, a small shift, the kind that was less a reaction than a recalibration happening in real time. They're escalating faster than I expected, he said. Does the audit request have standing? Technically, he said, the governance committee has broad investigative authority under the corporate charter. If they file formally before the summit, the review period runs 45 days. By which time the summit is over, the international partners have gone home, and the window is gone. Yes. She looked at him. Can you block it? Blocking it raises questions about why I'm blocking it. Then we need to move before it's filed formally. She thought for a moment. How long do they have before the formal filing closes? 72 hours from the initial request. 6 days left to the summit. 72 hours before the audit request locked in. She was doing the arithmetic in her head, and it was not producing comfortable numbers. Then we accelerate, she said. He looked at her. Accelerating means presenting incomplete. We're not incomplete, she said. We're not everything we want to be. That's different. She held his gaze. The Singapore file is complete. The metadata comparison is complete. The payment trail on Hallam Pacific has 3 of 4 documentation links. The 4th we can establish circumstantially from the communication logs. That's enough to present. It's enough to begin, he said. It's not enough to finish. Then I begin it, she said, and you finish it. He was quiet. The particular quiet of someone who has already run the calculation and arrived at the same conclusion, but wanted one more pass to make sure. The summit format, he said slowly. Day 1 is partner presentations. Day 2 opens with board reports. If we move at the start of day 2, before the board members can use the session to establish any counter-narrative, she said. Yes. He stood up, moved to the window with soul behind it, gray and enormous and indifferent. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she could see the line of his shoulders, the particular weight a person carries when they are responsible for a large number of things simultaneously and are choosing, in real time, which weight to set down and which to carry forward. All right, he said. He turned. We accelerate. Days 6 and 7 blurred. Nia slept in 4-hour intervals, woke, worked, slept again. She ate at her desk. She drank more coffee than was advisable and registered this in the abstract way that you register bad decisions you're making deliberately because the alternative is worse. She and Jiwon built the presentation in layers. The evidence ordered not just logically, but narratively, because the room they were presenting to on day 2 of the summit would contain people who processed information with both the logical and the emotional, and the truth needed to move through both channels simultaneously to be unmovable. On the evening of the 7th day, Tae-hyun called her into his office at 9 and sat across from her, not with documents between them, but with 2 cups of tea that Jiwon had apparently left before going home, and for the first time since she'd come to 32, the conversation was not about the work. Tell me something that isn't this, he said. She looked at him. He looked exhausted. Not in the way that showed externally, not in any dramatic sense, but in the way she had learned to read in someone who maintained their surface at considerable ongoing cost. His eyes had a quality of thinness to them, like a layer that was wearing down. I had a fish, she said, in my first apartment in Seoul. When I moved here, it died in 3 weeks. She paused. I think about it sometimes, whether the apartment was the problem or whether I just wasn't paying attention to the signs. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted in a way she couldn't name exactly. Not humor, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Something human and small. What was its name? He said. I called it Chairman, she said. It seemed appropriate at the time. He was quiet. Then, in a voice that was dry and low and entirely without performance, I hope that's not how this ends. She laughed. It surprised her. The sound of it surprised her. Genuine, short, a little rough at the edges. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a second, and he was watching her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Something open in it that didn't fit the architecture of a man whose default setting was contained. What did you want to be? She said. Before this. He looked at his tea. An architect, he said. My grandfather built things. I used to watch him draw, before I understood what else he built. She didn't push on that. She understood what the sentence was carrying, and she let it carry it without adding to the weight. They sat in his office until past 11, and they talked. Not about the summit, not about the documentation, not about the 3 board members or the Hallam Pacific thread, or the audit request sitting like a timer in the governance committee inbox. They talked the way 2 people talk when they are in the middle of something enormous and have chosen, for an hour, to exist beside it instead of inside it. When she left, she was aware that something had changed in a way she didn't entirely have language for yet, and she walked to the elevator and pressed the button and thought about it all the way down 32 floors without reaching a conclusion. She was still thinking about it at 2 in the morning when her phone rang. Unknown number, Seoul area code. She answered because at 2 in the morning, unknown calls either mean nothing or they mean something, and the balance of her current situation had shifted the odds considerably. Ms. Brooks, a woman's voice. Older, precise. The English carrying the particular careful quality of a person who learned it as a 3rd or 4th language and learned it well. I apologized for the hour. I need to speak with you before the summit, privately, not in the building. Nia sat up.
Who is this? A pause. My name is Ha-yeon Suk. I was the primary documentation contact for the Singapore office. Another pause. I'm the one who sent the file. The person who had spent a year and a half building the Singapore documentation, who had sent it 17 days early, who had decided apparently that whatever was happening here needed to accelerate. Why are you calling me? Nia said. Why not Mr. Kong directly? Because what I need to tell you, Ha-yeon Suk said, her voice dropping into a register that was careful and very controlled, and underneath the control was something that was trying not to become panic, is not something he will want to hear, and I need someone to tell him who he will actually listen to. Nia's chest was very still. What is it? She said. Ha-yeon Suk told her. It took 4 minutes. Nia sat on the edge of her bed in the dark of her Mapo-gu apartment and listened and did not say a single word until the woman on the other end of the phone had finished. Then she said, "Send me the secondary file." "It's already sent," Ha-yeon Suk said, "to the address you use for personal documentation, not the company server." "How did you know that address?" A pause that was its own kind of answer. "Miss Brooks, the people I've been watching for 18 months are very thorough. I had to be thorough in return." The call ended. Nia opened her email. The secondary file was 47 pages. She read all of it standing at her kitchen counter, her phone screen too bright in the dark room, reading the way you read something that is dismantling your understanding of your situation sentence by sentence. She arrived at 32 at 6 the following morning. She did not go to her office. She knocked on the door of Tae-hyun's office, and when he said come in, she came in and closed the door and set her phone on his desk with the secondary file open on the screen. She waited while he read. She watched his face. He read slowly, methodically. His expression did not change dramatically, not the way expressions change in performances of shock, not the wide-eyed version of devastation. His jaw tightened once, near the beginning. By the middle, he had stopped breathing at quite the same rate. The breaths had gotten slower, more deliberate, the way a person breathes when they are managing a physical response to information. By the end, he set the phone down on the desk and was quiet for a long moment. "Ji-won," he said. The name came out flat. Not angry. Something past angry. The voice of someone on the other side of a particular kind of pain, looking at what's left on the ground. Nia said nothing. She stood and let the silence hold what it needed to hold. Ji-won, whose full name, according to Ha-yeon Suk's secondary file, was Yoon Ji-won, whose sister was married to a man who worked for the competitor organization named in the Singapore documentation, whose personal accounts showed a pattern of deposits that didn't align with her salary at Beck Dragon Group, whose access credentials had been used at 11:14 on a night 3 weeks ago to log into the governance documentation server for 4 minutes while the building was supposed to be empty. Ji-won had been inside the preparation from the beginning. Not all of it, not the deepest layers, but enough. Enough to know the shape of what was being built. Enough to have told someone. "The audit request," Nia said quietly. "She told them when to file it." "Yes." His voice was even, too even. The even of a man working very hard to remain inside himself. "The 72-hour window," she said. "They knew when we were planning to accelerate, which means they knew the summit was the mechanism, which means they've had time to prepare a counter-presentation," he said. She sat down. The weight of it, the full weight of it, was settling now, pushing down through her chest, through the careful architecture of 11 days of work, through the ground plan they had built together. Everything they had built, Ji-won had seen. Not everything. She hadn't been in the room for the secondary Singapore file, hadn't known about Ha-yeon Suk, hadn't had access to the most closely held elements. But the structure, the timeline, the fact that Nia was the one who would be standing in the front of that room. They knew she was coming. They had 3 days to make sure that when she stood at that podium, what she presented was the thing that destroyed her instead of them. "The fabricated evidence," she said slowly. "The counter-presentation. They'll have something ready. Something that positions everything we have as the outcome of a manipulated, motivated employee working on behalf of a compromised CEO." She paused. "Me manipulating you. You compromised by—" She stopped. The particular direction that sentence was going landed in the room like something dropped from a height. His expression didn't change.
But his hands, which were flat on the desk, pressed down for a moment. They'll bring the manipulation narrative they've been circulating since the first week, she said. They'll have documentation for it. Fabricated the way my originals were fabricated. Metadata stripped, timestamps adjusted, communications that never happened but will look like they did. Yes, he said, and we have 3 days. Yes. She looked at him across the desk. She was tired in a way that had gone through exhaustion and come out the other side into something that felt almost like clarity. The specific clarity of when the options have reduced down to almost nothing and the path forward is not comfortable, but it is, at least, singular. Then we need to change the plan, she said, because the plan they know about is the plan that kills us. He looked at her. What do you want to do? She thought for a moment. Not long. The shape of it was already there, had started forming somewhere between the kitchen counter at 2 in the morning and the elevator ride up 32 floors, assembled out of the same kind of instinct that had gotten her through 4 years of being systematically undermined. The instinct that said the only way to survive a room that has been set against you is to change what the room is expecting. They're expecting me to present evidence at the start of day 2, she said. Standard format. Presentation, documentation package, formal board response. They have a counter for that. They've had 3 days to build it, and they probably had pieces of it ready before Jiwan even gave them the summit timeline. Yes, he said. So I don't do that, she said. I let them go first. He was quiet. Day 2 opens with board reports, she said. Let them open. Let them present whatever they've prepared. Let them put the counter-narrative in front of the room, in front of the international partners, on the record. She held his gaze. Because once it's on the record, I can dismantle it in real time, in front of everyone. With the source files, the metadata comparison, the Singapore documentation, and she paused. And Hayon Suk, live, by video link from Singapore. Because Hayon Suk is not in any document they know about. The silence stretched. They'll attack you the moment you open your mouth, he said. Your credibility, your standing, your reason for being in the room. I know, she said. They'll have the fabricated record of the manipulation narrative ready to display. I know, she said. Let them display it. Every piece of fabricated evidence they show is a piece I can trace back to its actual origin in front of witnesses. The more they show, the more I have to work with. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not calculated, not the assessing look of someone measuring a strategic asset. Something rawer than that. Something that was, she thought, closer to the look of a person who has been alone in a particular kind of fight for a very long time and has just understood that they are, for the first time, genuinely not alone in it. You understand, he said slowly, that if this doesn't work, if they get control of the narrative before you can dismantle it, there is no recovery position for either of us. Yes, she said. I understand that. And you're still Tae Hyun. She used his name. She hadn't before, and not his given name, not directly. It landed in the room between them with a weight that neither of them acknowledged out loud. I've been invisible in this building for 4 years. I am done playing it careful. I am done waiting in the margins for the right moment. Her voice didn't shake. She was surprised by that. I walked into your office with a resignation letter and you tore it up. I'm still here because I chose to be. That means when it counts, I get to choose how I stand. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, Seoul was waking up. The early sounds of the city coming through the glass, distant and ordinary, completely indifferent to the geography of what was happening on the 32nd floor. He nodded once. Then we have 3 days, he said, and there is one more thing I need to tell you before we do anything else. Something in his voice had changed, a register shift, subtle, the kind that meant what was coming had been held back and was now being released because the alternative had run out of space. She looked at him. The 4th board member, he said. The one I haven't named. She went still. The leak inside the Singapore documentation, he said. The reason Hayon Suk sent the secondary file to you instead of filing it through official channels. He paused. The pause of a man choosing, carefully, the exact words for something that has no good words. The 4th board member is not someone who was brought into this network by Choi or by the competitor organization. Her hands were very still in her lap. The 4th board member has been operating independently, he said,
for longer than any of the others. The competitor organization was not their employer. They were... He stopped. Then, they were the architect. The person who built the network that Choi and the others operate inside. The reason this has been running for 4 years without full exposure is that the person at the center of it has never appeared in any document, any communication, any record that pointed directly to them. Until the secondary file, she said. Until the secondary file, he confirmed. She waited. He said the name. She heard it, processed it, sat with it for the 3 seconds it took for the full structure of what it meant to assemble itself. The name was not Choi, was not Park, was not any of the 3 board members from the Singapore documentation. The name was the head of the governance committee, the person who had received the audit request, the person who, in 72 hours, would have the legal authority to quarantine everything they had built, the person who had, 4 years ago, personally signed the contract that brought Nia Brooks into the Back Dragon group. The floor felt, for a moment, not entirely solid. He recruited me, she said. The words came out flat, stripped of everything except their content. I don't believe it was targeted, Taehyun said carefully. I believe you were hired as a competent employee without specific intent, but your work, the quality of it, made you visible in a way that made you useful to him. The proposals that were taken from you were not just taken for credit. They were used. In the intelligence pipeline, your strategic analysis was being fed externally for 4 years, Ms. Brooks. Every idea you produced that was worth stealing was worth more than just someone else's career advancement. She was looking at the middle distance somewhere past his shoulder. She had spent 4 years believing she was being erased. She had documented 31 instances of intellectual theft. She had written them in a notebook, kept the evidence, held on to the truth of it with both hands because the truth was the only thing that made the erasure bearable. The knowledge that what was being taken from her was real and had value, and that the people taking it knew it even as they pretended she didn't exist. She had been right. It had value. It had been worth more than she knew. It had been feeding something far larger and far uglier than the career advancement of a handful of corrupt executives. She had not been invisible. She had been a resource. 3 days, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady. 3 days, he said. She stood up, picked up her phone from his desk, walked to the door. She stopped, her hand on the frame. Not turning around this time, just standing, facing the hallway beyond the door, the long, amber-lit corridor of the 32nd floor that had been 6 weeks ago, a place she had never been and couldn't have imagined standing in. When this is over, she said, to the doorframe, to the hallway, to the particular architecture of the moment, I need you to understand that whatever happens in that room, I'm not doing it for the company. I'm not doing it for the case. I'm doing it because 4 years of my life were taken and put to use for something I would never in my life have agreed to, and I want it back. Her voice didn't crack. It was just very low and very true. All of it. She walked out. Behind her, Taehyun sat alone in his office at 6:20 in the morning with Seoul pressing gray and enormous through the glass, and his hands were flat on the desk and his face had the expression of a man looking at the full shape of what he had built and what had been built around him and what it had cost someone who had deserved none of it. He picked up the phone. He had 3 days and no margin, and one person standing at the center of it who had just told him, without asking him for anything in return, exactly who she was. He began to make the calls. 3 days compressed into something that didn't feel like time at all, more like pressure, the kind that builds in your ears when you descend too fast, the kind your body registers before your mind catches up. Nia slept in 2-hour windows. She stopped tracking which hours. She kept a change of clothes in the cabinet under her desk on 32 and used the executive floor bathroom at 4 in the morning when the building was empty enough that she could stand at the sink for 5 minutes without performing composure for anyone. She looked at herself in that mirror on the second morning and didn't particularly recognize the face looking back. Not because it had changed dramatically, but because the expression on it was one she hadn't seen on herself before. Not frightened, not determined in the clean, resolved way of someone who has made peace with a decision. Just awake. Completely, thoroughly awake, in a way that went deeper than the surface of her eyes. She worked. Hyun-suk was secured on a video link through a server that Taehyun's technical team had set up outside the company network,
a detail that had required 18 hours of quiet work by two people she never met and whose names she never learned. Ha Yeon-suk would be live. Not a recording, live in real time from Singapore, available for direct questioning by anyone in the summit room who doubted the documentation. The decision to go live instead of recorded had been Nia's, and it had cost something. If the link failed, if anything in the technical chain broke, there was no fallback. But a recording could be challenged as fabricated. A live person answering questions in real time could not be easily dismissed, and dismissal was what Choi's team would attempt the moment the room gave them an opening. She rebuilt the presentation from the ground up. Not the structure that held, but the sequence. The counterattack plan required her to let the board's version of events occupy the room first, which meant the presentation she brought had to be responsive rather than initiating. She had to walk in knowing what they were going to say before they said it, and she had to have the dismantling of each piece so completely internalized that she could produce it without hesitation, without notes, without the half-second of searching that would read as uncertainty to a room already primed to find her untrustworthy. She practiced it. Alone in her office at midnight, standing, speaking out loud to the empty room, going through the sequence the way athletes go through a course before they run it. Not imagining success, but mapping every point where something could go wrong and drilling the response until it lived in muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Tae-hyun watched her practice once. He stood in the doorway of her office at 11:40 on the second night and listened for approximately 3 minutes. She didn't stop. When she reached the end of the sequence, she turned and he was still there. "You're going too fast on the metadata section," he said. "The room will need longer to absorb what they're seeing on screen." "I know," she said. "I'm running it fast to make sure I have every piece. I'll slow it down in the room." He nodded, said nothing else, went back to his office. The governance committee head, the man whose name she now knew, the man she now understood, had signed her employment contract 4 years ago and had been the invisible architecture behind everything that had been taken from her. His name was Lim Byung-chul, 63 years old, 31 years with the Baked Dragon Group, the longest tenured board member, a man whose photograph hung in the company history display in the main lobby between a shot of the building under construction and a portrait of Tae-hyun's father from the year before he died. A man whose presence in the company was so foundational that the idea of him as the center of the network felt, in one part of her brain, impossible, and in another part, the part that had spent 4 years watching her work disappear and wondering what it was actually worth to the people taking it, felt like the only thing that had ever made complete sense. She had not told anyone else his name, not because Tae-hyun had asked her not to. He hadn't, but because the name, once said in the wrong room to the wrong set of ears, would detonate before they were ready for the blast. 48 hours before the summit, Lim Byung-chul sent her an email. It came to her company account, which she checked from the 32nd floor. The subject line was, "A conversation, if you're willing." The body was 3 sentences. He acknowledged that the transition to the executive floor had been a significant change. He said that as the head of the governance committee, he had a responsibility to ensure that new direct report positions were appropriately supported, and that he would welcome a brief conversation before the summit. Something informal, he wrote, just to make sure she felt confident in her standing within the organization. She read it 3 times. The structure of the message was immaculate. If she screenshotted it and showed it to anyone unfamiliar with the context, it read as the kind of considerate institutional outreach a senior board member might extend to a newly promoted employee. It was completely without any fingerprint that could be characterized as threatening or inappropriate. He was watching her. He knew she was on 32. He knew, she was almost certain, that the Singapore documentation had arrived. I was trying to determine whether she knew his name. She wrote back, "Thank you. I appreciate the outreach. The summit schedule is quite full, but I'll look for an opportunity. Non-committal. Warm enough to not alarm. No information." She forwarded it to Tae-hyun's private email immediately. His response came in 4 minutes. "Good. Don't meet with him." She hadn't planned to. The summit began on a Tuesday. The venue was the Baked Dragon Group's dedicated conference center on the 4th and 5th floors, a space she had helped service from the outside as part of the administrative support structure for 2 of the 4 annual summits during her time on 23. She had arranged catering logistics for the 2nd year. She had formatted slide templates for the third. She had never been inside the main hall during an active session. She walked in on day one, took her seat at the strategic advisor's position at the main table, a seat that had been added to the layout that morning, visible, immediately to Taehyun's right, and felt the weight of every eye in the room make contact with her, and then deliberately move away, which was its own kind of attention. Choi was across the table, 3 seats down. He looked at her once when she sat down, a look that lasted less than 2 seconds and contained everything he needed her to know without saying anything that could be noted in the minutes. Park was behind him, in the secondary advisor row. She did not look at Nia at all, which Nia had learned to read as more dangerous than looking. Lim Byung-chul was at the far end of the table, in his position as board chair for the summit session. He was a compact man. She had seen him in the lobby twice and in the building directory photograph many times. But in person, he was smaller than she'd assembled from those impressions. The kind of small that isn't diminishing because it's offset by something in the way he occupied space. A practiced stillness that had the quality of someone who had never in 31 years needed to fill a room by taking up physical room in it. His authority was ambient, environmental. He looked at her when she sat down. Not the 2-second assessment Choi had given her. A longer look, calm and complete. The kind of look that was itself a message. I see you. I am not alarmed by you. You should consider what that means. She looked back, and she held it, and she let it be completely neutral, and she watched something in his expression recalibrate by a fraction of a degree. Day one moved the way the first day of these events always moved. Partner presentations, division performance reviews, the formal business of a conglomerate accounting for itself to its stakeholders. Nia took notes. She asked 2 questions during the afternoon session, both technical, both entirely within the legitimate scope of her position, both chosen because they established, quietly, on the record, in front of the international partners, that she had a substantive command of the operational detail. She was not performing competence. She was documenting it, into the record, before the room that would watch her stand up tomorrow. Taehyun ran the sessions with the particular quality she had come to understand as his natural register, contained, precise, moving through the agenda without waste. He did not look at her more than the role required. He had said, on the morning of day one, "In that room, you're my strategic advisor." That's the only relationship that exists in there. She had understood. She performed it accordingly. At 6 in the evening, the formal day one session closed. The dinner that followed was optional attendance in the adjoining room, and Nia skipped it. She went back to 32, pulled up the final version of the presentation sequence, and ran it twice more in the empty office. At 9, Jiwon's replacement, a quiet young man named Seong-jun, whom Tae-hyun had brought in from an external firm 2 days after Jiwon's access was quietly revoked, knocked on her door and said that Mr. Kong wanted to see her. She went in. Tae-hyun was at his desk. He had 2 phones in front of him and the expression of someone who had been on calls for the last 2 hours and had just finished the last one and was deciding whether what he'd learned was manageable. They filed a motion this afternoon, he said, during the dinner session. Choi and 2 board members. Formal motion to restructure the Day 2 agenda. They're requesting that the governance committee present first before the board reports. She sat down. They want Lim to go first. Yes. Which means the fabricated counter-presentation leads the room before I have anything on the record. Which changes the plan, he said. She thought for a moment. Her hands were in her lap and she pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. One breath, deliberate, the kind that is a conscious choice rather than a reflex. Does the motion pass? She asked. It needs a majority of board members to pass. 4 of 7 have signed it. The 3 from the Singapore documentation plus Lim. Yes. And the remaining 3? 2 will follow whatever direction the room takes. 1, he paused. 1 has been waiting to see which way this breaks. She looked at him. Can you get to that one tonight? A pause. I'm already trying. She nodded. Stood up. Went to the window, his window, the one with soul behind it, which she had never stood at before, always sat across from while he stood here. The city was wet again, the rain back, the lights blurring down through the glass. She looked at it and thought. If the motion passes, she said, and Lim goes first, let him. Let him present whatever he's built. Let it go into the room, into the record, in front of the international partners. She turned. and then I stand up. They'll challenge your standing to respond, he said. The governance committee chair has session authority to rule on participation. Lim can't rule me out of order in front of 40 international partners without explaining why the CEO's strategic advisor is being barred from the floor, she said. That explanation, in front of those partners, is its own problem for him. He knows that, which means he won't rule me out. He'll try to discredit me instead. She met Taehyun's eyes, which is what I'm ready for. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not scared, he said. It wasn't a question, more like something he was confirming to himself. I'm terrified, she said. That's different. Day 2 arrived at 7 in the morning with a quality of stillness that had nothing to do with calm. Nia dressed in the executive floor bathroom. The black blazer this time, not charcoal, black, which was a choice she had made deliberately and without sentiment. She checked the tablet with the presentation file, checked the secure link to Ha Yeon-suk in Singapore, checked the backup drive with the source documentation. She checked everything twice. Then she stopped checking, because checking a third time was anxiety, and anxiety was a resource she couldn't afford to spend. She walked into the main hall at 7:55. The motion had passed. She'd found out at 6:30 a message from Tae-hyun's new number that said only 4-3. Motion carried. The 7th vote came through for us, but not enough. Be ready. Lim Byung-chul was already at the head of the table when she came in. He was speaking quietly to someone on his left, a board member she recognized from the Singapore file, one of the 3 named in the intelligence pipeline. They stopped talking when she entered. Lim looked up, and this time his look was different from yesterday's. Cleaner, more certain. He had something ready, and he knew she was walking into it. She sat down. Tae-hyun arrived at 8 exactly and took his seat. He didn't look at her. His face was set in the expression she had learned to read as operational, all surface, everything useful happening underneath where it didn't show. The session was called to order. Lim stood. He had the bearing of a man who had run rooms like this for 31 years and had never once left one having lost ground. He spoke with a particular kind of authority, not loud, not aggressive. The voice of institutional gravity, the voice of a man who had never needed to be aggressive because the room had always arranged itself around his preferences before aggression was necessary. Before we proceed with the standard board reports, he said, the governance committee has a matter of urgent organizational concern to bring to the floor. Given the presence of our international partners, I want to address this now, in this forum, with full transparency. That is what our institutional integrity demands. He nodded to someone at the back of the room. A screen at the front of the hall activated. Nia looked at it. The document on the screen was a communication log, formatted to appear as an internal Bayek Dragon Group messaging thread, with timestamps, user IDs, and the specific visual template of the company's internal platform. The user IDs were hers and Tae-hyun's. The timestamps ran across a period of 5 weeks, the 5 weeks since she had come to 32. She read the content of the first 3 exchanges on the screen. The fabrication was good. She had known it would be good. She had known they had had time and resources and the specific knowledge of what the company's internal communication looked like from the inside. It was good enough that someone reading it without context, without knowledge of what was real, would have found it entirely plausible. The conversation constructed on that screen showed Nia Brooks systematically feeding company strategic documentation to an unnamed external contact, with Kang Tae-hyun's explicit knowledge and implicit facilitation. The motive, implicit in the constructed conversation, was personal, a professional relationship that had been allowed to compromise the CEO's judgment, resulting in the improper promotion, the improper access, and the improper exposure of confidential governance documentation. It was not just a counter-presentation. It was a mirror image of the truth, polished to a plausibility that was almost admirable in its craftsmanship. Lim spoke over the image. His voice was measured and sorrowful in the particular way of a man performing institutional responsibility. I bring this to the floor with considerable reluctance, he said. Mr. Kong's leadership has been a cornerstone of this organization, but the governance committee's obligation to our shareholders, our partners, and the integrity of this institution requires us to act on evidence of this nature with full transparency and appropriate urgency. He paused. I would therefore ask, he said, that Ms. Brooks and Mr. Kang both recuse themselves from this session pending the governance committee's formal review. As per the corporate charter, section 14, the committee chair has authority to request such recusal in the presence of the full board and confirmed quorum. He looked directly at her when he said it. The room was very quiet. 40 international partners, 10 division heads, 7 board members, support staff along the edges. All of it compressing into a silence that had a specific texture, the texture of a room full of people who are watching something and have not yet determined what it is. Nia put both hands flat on the table. She felt the surface of it, cool, solid, the grain of the wood under her palms. She breathed once through her nose. Then she stood up. "I won't be recusing myself," she said. Lim looked at her with the expression of a man who had expected this and had prepared for it. "Ms. Brooks, the corporate charter. Section 14, she said, provides the committee chair with recusal authority in the presence of credible evidence of misconduct, subject to challenge by the affected party within the session. I'm challenging it." She kept her voice level, not raised, not performing. Just present, completely present, the way she had made herself present in that empty office running through the sequence for the 4th and 5th and 6th time. "And I'll tell you why." She picked up the tablet. "The document currently on that screen," she said, "is a fabrication. I can prove that in approximately 20 minutes in this room with primary source documentation." She looked at the international partners, not at Lim, not at Choi, at the partners, the people in this room whose presence made suppression impossible. "I apologize for the use of your time. What you're about to see is more complicated than what you've been shown, but it is also more important, and I think you deserve to see it in full." She connected the tablet to the hall's presentation system. "Let's start with the document on the screen," she said, "because the person who built it made one mistake." She pulled up the metadata analysis, the technical breakdown of the fabricated communication log's internal file structure, which showed, in the specific language of digital forensics, that the timestamps on the fabricated log had been generated from a system that was running on a server time zone inconsistent with the Bake Dragon Group's internal server architecture. The fabricated messages, convincing in content, had been constructed on a machine set to a different time zone than the company's own systems. The discrepancy was 4 hours and 17 minutes, invisible to the naked eye, unmistakable to the analysis. "This document," she said, keeping her voice entirely even, "was not generated on the Beck Dragon Group's internal servers. The metadata shows a server timestamp originating from a machine operating on a time zone consistent with the external organization named in the Singapore documentation." She advanced the slide. "Which is the same organization that the Singapore documentation identifies as the recipient of 4 years of confidential strategic intelligence from this company." The room shifted. Not dramatically. The people in it were professionals, and professionals do not gasp or exclaim. But there was a change in the quality of the attention in the space, a tightening, a collective recalibration. Choi was very still across the table. Lim had not moved. His expression had not changed. He was watching her with the attention of someone who had just understood that the situation had departed from the version he had prepared for, and was now calculating in real time. "I'd like to introduce," Nia said, "Ha Yeon-suk, who was the senior documentation officer for the Beck Dragon Group's Singapore office for the last 6 years, and who has spent 18 months compiling a complete record of the intelligence pipeline I just referenced." She activated the video link. Ha Yeon-suk appeared on the screen at the front of the hall, a woman in her 50s, composed, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a stack of physical documents on the desk in front of her. She looked directly into the camera, directly into the room in Seoul, and she did not look like a person who was frightened. "Good morning," Ha Yeon-suk said. Her voice was clear through the audio system. "I'm available for questions from anyone in the room." 3 of the international partners had straightened in their seats. One of them, a woman from a London-based institutional fund, whose organization had been one of the ones most impacted by the collapsed Singapore partnership 18 months ago, had her pen in her hand and was writing. Nia advanced to the next section. The next 12 minutes were the most focused 12 minutes of her life. She did not rush. She did not perform emotion. She moved through the documentation the way she had moved through it in the empty office at midnight, with the rhythm of someone who knows exactly where each piece fits and has no interest in improvisation. Source files with unaltered timestamps, the metadata comparison, showing the originals predating the presented versions by months, the Hallam Pacific payment trail with the 3 documentary links, and the circumstantial fourth established through the communication logs, the Singapore wire transfer records cross-referenced against the competitor organization's known financial activity. She was 4 minutes from the board member section, the piece that would name Lim Byung-chul directly, in front of the full room, on the record, when Choi stood up. "This is an orchestrated attack," he said. His voice came out louder than he'd intended. She could hear it, the pressure behind it, the thing that happened to a person's voice when their control of a situation was departing faster than they could compensate. On the governance structure of this organization, coordinated by an employee who was improperly placed in a position of access specifically to facilitate Director Choi, Taehyun's voice. Low, even, with the specific quality she had heard exactly once before. In his office on a rainy night when he had said, "Sit down," and the word had not been a request. "Sit down." Choi sat down. The room absorbed the exchange in silence. Nia continued. The board member section took 4 minutes. She named each of the 3 from the Singapore documentation first: the payment records, the communication logs, the intelligence timeline showing which strategic decisions had been compromised and when. She presented it without editorializing, without accusation beyond what the documents themselves contained, in the particular flat voice of someone presenting facts to a room that is capable of forming its own judgments. Then she said, "The fourth thread in this documentation concerns the individual who is the structural origin of the network I've described." She looked at Lim Byung-chul. He looked back. His face was still. The stillness of someone who has prepared for this specific moment for 31 years of institutional navigation and is now inside it, and the preparation is holding, and underneath the preparation is something that is not holding, something she could see only because she had been in the same room with him for 2 days and had learned the specific geography of his composure. "Mr. Lim Byung-chul," she said, "has been the coordinating authority for this intelligence pipeline since its inception 4 years ago. The Singapore documentation contains 16 communications in which he is the directing party. The financial record shows a pattern of transfers, indirect, routed through 3 intermediary structures, that correlates with the strategic intelligence delivery dates over the same period." She advanced the slide to the financial diagram. "This is not a secondary or peripheral involvement. This is the origin." The room was very still. Then the London fund partner set her pen down and said, in a voice that was entirely calm and carried the particular weight of institutional authority, "I'd like to request a 5-minute recess before this continues." And Lim Byung-chul, for the first time since Nia had watched him across a table for 2 days, looked at his hands. Taehyun called the recess. The room moved. Controlled chaos, the kind that happens when 40 professionals are all recalibrating simultaneously and performing, with varying degrees of success, the outward appearance of orderly transition. Partners moving to the edges of the room with phones in hands. Board members clustered in configurations that meant something. Support staff hovering. Nia stood at the front of the room beside the presentation screen and did not move to anyone. She kept her hands at her sides and her breathing even and watched the room move around her the way a person stands in a river and watches the water. Seong-jun appeared at her elbow with a glass of water. She hadn't asked for it. She took it anyway and drank half of it and handed it back. Choi had left the room. Park was with him. Nia noted this without reaction. Lim had not left. He was at the far end of the table, speaking quietly with one of the 3 named board members, his voice too low for her to hear across the space. His face had rearranged itself. The ambient authority was still there, because 31 years of it didn't evaporate in 4 minutes. But it had a different quality now, something slightly compressed, like a pressure that had nowhere left to expand into. Taehyun appeared at her side. He stood close enough to speak quietly without being overheard. "The London Fund Partner is requesting that the Governance Committee Chair step down from session authority pending independent review," he said. "She's speaking with the other international partners now." "That's not us," Nia said. "That's them deciding." "Yes," he said. "That's how it has to be." She nodded. She drank the rest of the water. "Choi is trying to reach someone outside the building," he said. "My team is aware of it." She looked at him. "The external organization?" "Yes." "What does that mean for the room?" "It means we finish this session before outside interference becomes an option," he said. "How much more do you have?" "The personnel section," she said. The documentation of the intellectual property theft, my work, the 31 instances, the forged versions versus the source files. That's the piece that establishes the individual level misconduct for the employment record. She paused. And the employment record for the governance committee members implicated. How long? 8 minutes, maybe 10. He looked at her. His eyes were very direct and there was no performance in them, nothing managed or constructed. Just the look of a man who was standing in the middle of something enormous with one other person and was, in this moment, completely present to the weight of it. Then let's finish it, he said. The recess ended. Nia stood at the front of the room. The London fund partner had returned to her seat. She had her pen in her hand again. 3 other international partners had moved forward in their seats. The 7th board member, the one who had been watching to see which way the room broke, was sitting with his hands folded on the table and his face in the expression of a man who has made a decision and is at peace with it. Lim Byung-chul was in his chair. He looked at Nia across the length of the table. She looked at him. "I'd like to continue," she said. She advanced the slide. The personnel section was the piece she had built herself. Without Tae-hyun, without Ji-won, without anyone. Because this piece was hers, had always been hers, was the documented record of 4 years of her own life laid out in timestamps and file headers and the specific forensic language of metadata. Comparison. 31 instances. Side by side, her originals and the presented versions, the dates, the alterations, the names attached to documents that had begun somewhere else entirely. She did not speak emotionally while presenting it. She did not need to. The documents did that on their own, and a room full of professionals watching a person stand in front of evidence of 4 years of systematic theft would supply the emotion without being invited to. She could see it in the posture of the people watching, the particular quality of discomfort that crossed several faces, the kind that meant they were processing something that required them to reconsider what they had assumed about the building they worked in or did business with. She was 3 minutes from the end of the personnel section when the door at the back of the room opened. 2 men she didn't recognize. Suits, neither of them summit-issued, the specific physical quality of people whose job was not corporate. They came in quietly, moved along the wall, and one of them produced credentials and spoke quietly to the security officer stationed near the door. Nia kept presenting. She finished the personnel section. Advanced to the final slide, the organizational summary, the full network diagram that connected the board members, the external organization, the intelligence timeline, and the employment misconduct into a single coherent picture that the room could hold simultaneously. She said, "The documentation I've presented today has been submitted in full to an independent legal depository under time-stamped seal, and copies have been forwarded to the 3 independent board members and to the legal representatives of the international partner organizations present in this room. It cannot be quarantined, amended, or retracted by any internal governance authority." She looked at the room. "That's everything," she said. She sat down. The room was quiet for a long moment, a different quality of quiet than the one that had followed Lim's opening presentation. That quiet had been the quiet of people waiting to see what happened. This quiet was the quiet of people who had already seen it and were now inside the aftermath. The London fund partner spoke first. "I'd like to formally request that the independent audit provisions of our partnership agreement be activated immediately. We'll be reaching out to our legal team this afternoon." One of the other international partners said something in Korean that Nia caught in fragments. A request for documentation copies, a statement of organizational concern. The 7th board member, the one who had been waiting, cleared his throat. "I move that session authority for the remainder of this summit be transferred from the governance committee chair to the independent board panel pending formal review." He paused. "Given the circumstances." "Seconded," said the London fund partner, who did not have voting authority but said it anyway, and nobody in the room moved to correct her. The vote was called. Nia looked at Lim Byung-chul while the vote was conducted. He was looking at the table. His hands were flat on the surface in front of him, and for the first time in 2 days of watching him, the hands were not still. The motion carried 5-2. The 2 who voted against were the board members named in the Singapore documentation. They voted against, and in doing so placed themselves inside the record in exactly the way the record needed them to be. Tae-hyun declared the governance committee's session authority suspended pending review, in the level voice he had used all morning, and said that the board would reconvene in 45 minutes for formal procedural next steps, and the session was temporarily adjourned. The room began to move. Nia sat for a moment before she stood. She put both palms flat on the table the way she had done at the beginning, when Lim was putting the fabricated log on the screen, and she was deciding whether she was going to stand up. And she breathed once, twice, 3 times, letting the adrenaline work through her system in a controlled way rather than a chaotic one. She was aware, in a remote and slightly detached manner, that her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat and waited until they stopped. Then she stood up, collected the tablet, and turned toward the door. Taehyun was 2 steps behind her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I was close enough that she could register his presence without turning around, the specific gravity of a person who is very deliberately staying between you and the direction of the room you're walking away from. They were 4 steps from the door when it opened again. Not the 2 suited men from earlier, different. 3 of them, and with them, a woman Nia had never seen, early 50s, with the particular bearing of official authority, not corporate authority, but the other kind. The kind that carried the weight of an institution that existed outside and above the one they were currently standing inside. She had a document in her hand. She looked past Nia, directly at Taehyun. "Mr. Kong," she said, "I'm from the Financial Intelligence Unit. We've been monitoring the external transactions associated with this network for 14 months. She held up the document. "We'll need to take a formal statement from you, and from Ms. Brooks, and we'll need the full documentation package you've assembled." She paused. "We're also here to speak with Mr. Lim." At the far end of the room, Lim Byung-chul looked up. Nia looked at him from across the space. This man who had signed her employment contract 4 years ago, who had built the structure that had taken her work and turned it into something she would never have agreed to, who had sat across tables in boardrooms and governance meetings for 4 years and watched it happen and managed the distance between himself and the evidence with 31 years of practiced institutional expertise. The distance was gone now. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was no calculation in it on either side anymore. Taehyun's hand came to the small of her back. One brief, deliberate contact, not protecting her, not directing her, just present, just the pressure of a hand that was saying, "I'm here." Then he moved forward to meet the woman from the Financial Intelligence Unit, and his voice was steady and professional and entirely in control. And Nia stood in the doorway of the room where she had just dismantled 4 years of everything that had been taken from her, and watched Seoul's gray afternoon press against the windows and thought, with a clarity that surprised her in its simplicity, that she was still standing. She was still standing, and the resignation letter was long gone, and everything that came next was a territory that didn't have a map yet, and her hands, when she looked at them, had finally stopped shaking. The formal statements took 6 hours. They were conducted in 2 separate rooms on the 4th floor, Nia in one, Taehyun in another, which she understood was procedure and accepted without resistance, though the separation had a quality to it that she felt in a physical way, like a sound cut off mid-frequency. The woman from the Financial Intelligence Unit, whose name was Inspector Yoon Hae Rim, was professional in the particular way of someone who had sat across from many people in many rooms and had learned to be entirely without agenda in their facial expressions while asking questions that were entirely full of agenda. Nia answered everything, all of it. The sequence of events from the evening she had come to 32 with a resignation letter, through the documentation process, through Ha Yeon-suk's call at 2 in the morning, through the 3 days of accelerated preparation, through the summit session that morning. She answered in the flat, precise voice of someone who has spent 3.5 weeks living inside a body of evidence and knows it well enough to reproduce it without notes. Inspector Yoon took notes by hand. She asked clarifying questions that were careful and specific and occasionally circled back to earlier answers in ways that were designed to surface inconsistency. There was no inconsistency. Nia had not told a single thing in that summit room that was not documentable, and she had not told a single thing in this room that was not true. At one point, 2 hours in, Inspector Yoon set her pen down and looked at Nia directly. "You knew," she said. "When you agreed to present the documentation at the summit, you knew that if the counter-presentation succeeded, the legal exposure for you personally was significant." "Yes," Nia said, "and you proceeded." "Yes." "Why?" Nia looked at her hands on the table for a moment. They were still. She had stopped expecting them to shake, and they had obliged. Because the alternative, she said, was to let it keep going, and I was done with that. Inspector Yoon looked at her for a moment, then she picked up her pen. The statements concluded at 6 in the evening. Nia came out of the room into the fourth-floor corridor and stood there for a moment in the specific disorientation of a person whose adrenaline has been running at full capacity for approximately 36 hours straight and has now, without warning, been informed by the body that the emergency phase is over. The corridor was empty. The summit participants had dispersed. She didn't know where, didn't know the status of Lim or Choi or Park or the 3 board members, didn't know what the international partners had done after the session adjourned. She knew only that she was standing in a hallway on the 4th floor of a building that had eaten 4 years of her life, and her legs were tired, and her head had the particular hollowed-out quality of something that has been running too hot for too long. Seong-jun appeared from somewhere. He had a coat, hers, from her office, and a cup of something hot. She took both. The coat was warm, and the cup was tea, and she held it with both hands and said nothing, and he said nothing, and she thought, distantly, that Tae-hyun had chosen his replacement staff with more care than she had initially credited. "Mr. Kong is still in his session," Seong-jun said. "He said to tell you, go home." She almost laughed at that, the specific pragmatism of it. She went home. The apartment in Mapogu was the same as she had left it. Coat thrown over the chair, the water stain on the ceiling still unreported, the small accumulated evidence of a life that had been running on insufficient sleep and too much coffee for 3 weeks. She stood in the middle of the living room for a moment looking at it. Then she sat down on the floor, her back against the couch, and she did not cry. It wasn't crying exactly. It was something more structural than that, more like a building settling after a long period of load, the small sounds of things finding their new positions. And she sat there until it finished. Then she got up, showered, and slept for 11 hours. She did not dream about any of it. The days that followed had a surreal quality that she hadn't anticipated. She had prepared extensively for the summit. She had not prepared for the aftermath, which was its own kind of demanding, different from the acute pressure of the 3 days before the summit, but no less consuming. The Financial Intelligence Unit's investigation moved with the specific velocity of an institution that had been building its own case for 14 months and was now in possession of the documentation it had been missing. Lim Byung-chul was formally suspended from his board position within 48 hours of the summit. Choi Jun-seo and Park Soo-young were placed on administrative leave the same day, not by the FIU, but by Tae-hyun, in a communication that went to the full board and was copied to the international partner organizations, and was, Nia noted when she read it, precise and without editorializing in a way that was its own kind of statement. The 3 board members named in the Singapore documentation resigned within 72 hours. 2 of them through lawyers. One of them, the oldest, a man she had never spoken to directly, whose involvement in the intelligence pipeline had been the most peripheral of the 3, sent a personal letter to Tae-hyun that Tae-hyun showed her without explaining why he had decided to show her, a letter that was brief and formal and contained in its last paragraph a sentence that said, "I was told it was a financial arrangement that harmed no one directly. I understand now that was not accurate, and I understand the weight of that." She read it twice. She didn't know what to do with it. She folded it and handed it back. "Does it help?" Tae-hyun asked. "No," she said, "but it's honest." He took the letter back. "That's more than most." On whose access had been quietly revoked 3 days before the summit, who had apparently understood from the revocation that the situation had shifted, was arrested by the FIU 8 days after the summit at her apartment in Seochogu on charges related to the intelligence pipeline's communication channel. She did not resist. She did not, from what Nia heard secondhand through Seong-jun, appear surprised. The expression on her face when they came, apparently, was the expression of someone who had been waiting for a specific thing to happen and was experiencing, now that it was happening, something closer to relief than fear. Nia thought about that for a long time. About the elevator, and Park's expression in those last seconds before the doors closed. About the particular quality of fear in someone who is themselves caught inside something they cannot exit. She thought about whether she would have done anything differently with that information if she had trusted her own reading of it earlier. She concluded, after several days of returning to the question, that there was no version of that situation in which knowing Jiwan was frightened rather than predatory changed the calculus. But she thought about it anyway, because it was the kind of thing that deserved to be thought about rather than filed away. She went back to work 12 days after the summit. Not because the situation demanded it. The FIU process had its own timeline. The board restructuring was underway. The immediate crisis had resolved, but because she needed to. She needed to be in the work, to have the work be the thing filling the hours rather than the echoing space that the aftermath of enormous events tends to leave when the events are over. Her office on 32 was unchanged. The laptop, the desk, the view of Seoul from a different angle than the one she'd grown up looking at from below. She sat down and opened the division reports and went back to the actual function of the job. Not the covert function, not the evidence-gathering function, the actual strategic work she had been hired to do, the work she had been doing for years in a building that had taken it from her without credit. On her second day back, she submitted her first formal strategy recommendation as lead advisor. It was a restructured framework for the company's credit attribution system, a proposal that required every division to maintain documented records of individual contributions to strategic output, with a quarterly review process and an escalation pathway for disputes that went to an independent internal panel rather than through the existing management chain. The proposal included a retroactive review provision, not punitive. She was careful to construct it without punitive framing, that would allow any employee, current or former, to flag instances of undocumented intellectual contribution for inclusion in the formal record. She sent it to Tae-hyun with a note that said, "This doesn't fix what happened, but it builds the structure that makes it harder to happen again." He approved it the same day, without amendment. He sent it to the board, the reconstituted board, 3 new members being identified through an external selection process, with his signature and a line that said the proposal was to be treated as a governance priority. Implementation began the following week. She went to the floors personally. Not all of them, 23 specifically. Her old floor, the floor where she had spent 4 years at a desk, 3 down from Park Soo-young's office. She went on a Tuesday afternoon and she gathered the team in the conference room, the same conference room where she had sat 3 rows back watching her own work presented under someone else's name, the same long table, the same window with the same view of the neighboring building's ventilation units, and she explained the new credit attribution framework herself, in plain language, without the corporate smoothing that made policy announcements feel like a form of managed distance. There were 14 people in that room. Some of them she knew from 4 years of proximity. Some were new since she'd left. A few, 2 specifically, people she had worked alongside in the particular trenches of the support staff layer, looked at her with an expression she recognized because she had worn it herself. The expression of someone who is waiting to see if the thing being offered is real or is another version of what has always been offered and always failed to materialize. She had prepared for that expression. She had prepared for it because it was the honest response, and she was not interested in managing honest responses. "I know what this floor was like," she said. "I know specifically because I was in it. I know what happened here, and I know it wasn't a management failure in the abstract sense. It was something specific people did to specific other people, and some of those people are no longer in this building, and some of that harm is documented now and being addressed." She paused. "But I also know that the system that allowed it doesn't change because the people changed. It changes because the structure changes. That's what this is. It's not a promise, it's a mechanism." One of the 2 people she'd known leaned forward. Her name was Unji, and she was 28, and she had been at the company for 2 years, and she had the expression of someone who had arrived hoping for something and been in the process of adjusting those hopes downward for the entire duration. "What about the work that was already taken?" Unji said. "The stuff that's already in reports under someone else's name." "The retroactive review provision addresses that," Nia said. "It won't undo the attribution in the public record, but it adds to the record. It creates the documented acknowledgement." She held Unji's gaze. "It makes the truth of it part of the official account of what happened, which matters when you're building a career and you need the record to reflect what you actually built." Unji was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. Not the nod of someone convinced, the nod of someone deciding to wait and see, which was the right response, the honest response, and Nia respected it.
she went back to 32. Ha Suk arrived in
Seoul 3 weeks after the summit. She came not as a witness. Her role in the FIU's formal process was complete through written deposition, but because she had requested a meeting with Tae-hyun, and because Tae-hyun had asked Nia to be present. She was a small woman in person, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular quality of someone who has spent a significant portion of their professional life being very careful and very precise, and whose body has been shaped by that habit into something contained and deliberate. She wore no jewelry except a watch. She looked at Nia when she came in. The way someone looks at a person they have been in communication with through intermediaries and are now seeing in full for the first time. "You were braver than I expected," she said. Her English was careful and exact. "I expected you to settle for the documentation route. Let the FIU handle it, not stand in the room." "The room was the only option that couldn't be suppressed," Nia said. "Yes," Ha-yeon-suk said. "I know. I had hoped someone else would see it that way. I'm glad it was you." They sat for an hour, the three of them in Tae-hyun's office with Seoul behind the glass, and Ha-yeon-suk told them the part she hadn't put in the documentation. The 18 months of watching, of building, of carrying the specific weight of a person who knows something enormous and cannot yet release it. The moment she had decided to send the file early, not because the situation had changed, she said, but because she had reached the edge of what a person could hold alone, and the edge had declared itself without announcement. "I have a daughter," she said, not with emotional flourish, just as a fact, set down on the table. "She's 24. She's starting work next year. I didn't want her going into a world where this was invisible, where it just kept running because no one wanted to pay the cost of stopping it." The room was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," Tae-hyun said. The two words had the weight of someone who doesn't use them carelessly and is using them now because they are the accurate thing. Ha-yeon-suk looked at him. "Fix the Singapore partnership," she said, "the one that collapsed 18 months ago. The one that collapsed because of what was being fed through the pipeline. The people who built that partnership in good faith deserve to have it rebuilt properly." "I know," he said. "I intend to." She nodded, as if this was the answer she had come to hear. Then she stood, shook both their hands with the formality of someone for whom handshakes are still meaningful, and left. Nia watched the door close. "She built that case alone," she said, "for a year and a half." "Yes," Tae-hyun said, "with a daughter she was thinking about." "Yes." Nia was quiet for a moment. She thought about the small notebook in the side pocket of her bag, the one with 31 documented instances, kept because the truth needed to be held by someone even when no one else was holding it. She thought about the particular discipline of continuing to document when documentation felt like it was going nowhere, when the pile of evidence produced no visible result, when the act of keeping the record was the only available form of resistance. She thought about Ha-yeon-suk doing that, alone, in a Singapore office, for 18 months, for a daughter who didn't know it was happening. She thought about all the people who kept records that no one ever saw. "I want to create something," she said. Tae-hyun looked at her. "Tell me." "A formal internal channel," she said, "not just for the credit attribution system, for documentation, for people inside this organization who are witnessing something wrong and don't have a safe way to record it and surface it without becoming a target. A protected channel with legal standing that goes to an independent panel rather than through the management structure." She paused. "And an external version, a consultancy maybe, or a foundation, something that offers that infrastructure to organizations that don't have it. Because this building isn't the only one with this problem. This problem is everywhere." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "I know," she said. "You'd be building it on top of the work you're already doing." "I know," she said. "I have the energy for it. I didn't used to. I do now." He was quiet. Not the deliberating quiet. The quiet of someone who has already decided and is simply allowing the decision to be present before stating it. "Then build it," he said. "You'll have the resources." She nodded. She had already been building it in her head for 3 days, which he probably knew. Choi Jun-seo's formal termination was processed 6 weeks after the summit, following the completion of the HR investigation that the new board had initiated. He did not come to the building to collect his things. The boxes were sent. Nia heard this from Seong-jun, who told her without editorializing, and she sat with the information for a moment and felt. In the place where she had expected to feel something sharp, something flatter and more complete. Not satisfaction exactly, but the specific quality of a debt that has been accurately settled. Not more than what was owed. Not less. Exactly what was owed and therefore done. Park Soo-young's situation was more complicated. The HR investigation found evidence of direct participation in 9 of the 31 attribution incidents. It found no evidence of direct involvement in the intelligence pipeline, which matched Nia's own assessment of the situation, the reading she had made in an elevator when the expression on Park's face had not been predator but frightened participant, someone caught inside a structure they hadn't built and couldn't exit cleanly. Park was terminated for cause on the 9 documented incidents. The FIU found no grounds for criminal charges. She left the building without contest and without statement. 2 months later, Nia received an email to her personal address. 4 sentences. From Park Soo-young. I want you to know that what I did was wrong. I told myself reasons why it wasn't for a long time, and the reasons were convenient and they were lies. I'm not asking for anything from you. I wanted to say it to you directly because you're the one it was done to. Nia read it 3 times. She did not respond immediately. She held it for 3 days, which was the amount of time it took her to understand what she wanted to say back, and then she wrote 4 sentences of her own. I believe you. I'm not interested in carrying the anger for the rest of my life. It's too heavy for what I'd get from it. I hope the next thing you build is something you can stand behind. I'm going to be too busy to keep track. She sent it and didn't wait for a reply. Lim Byung-chul was indicted by the Financial Intelligence Unit 4 months after the summit on 11 counts related to corporate espionage, intelligence facilitation, and financial fraud. His lawyer released a statement that said nothing, in the specific way that professional legal statements are designed to say nothing in a manner that preserves optionality. His photograph was removed from the lobby display. Not dramatically, not with announcement, simply gone one morning when Nia came through the main doors, the frame empty, the wall behind it a slightly different shade than the surrounding surface from 31 years of the picture being there. She walked past it without stopping. The Singapore partnership, the one Ha-yeon-suk had specifically named, the institutional fund whose strategic relationship with Baked Dragon Group had been poisoned by the intelligence pipeline, began formal renegotiation 8 weeks after the summit. Nia led the strategy preparation for the renegotiation. She had read the collapsed partnership file extensively. She understood not just the financial structure of what had been destroyed, but the relational structure, the trust that had been extended in good faith and then quietly weaponized. She built the new proposal around that understanding, around the specific acknowledgement of what had happened and the specific mechanisms being put in place to ensure it couldn't happen again. The lead contact on the Singapore partner side was a man named Chen Wei-lin, who had been the one to sign the original partnership 7 years ago and had been present for its collapse 18 months ago. He was 61 and had, from the first video call, the expression of someone who had extended trust once and had subsequently developed a professional relationship with caution. Why should we re-engage? He said on the first call. Direct. The directness of someone who had decided that this conversation was only worth having if it was honest from the first sentence. Because the structure that allowed what happened is gone, Nia said. Not managed, not reorganized, gone. The people who built it are facing legal proceedings or are out of the organization. The governance architecture has been rebuilt from the board level down. And the partnership you built 7 years ago was good work. Work that was undermined from inside, not because it was flawed, but because people who were afraid of what it represented decided to poison it. She paused. That's what happened. Not a market condition, not a strategic misalignment. Someone was afraid of what you and Baked Dragon Group could build together, and they made sure it didn't get built. Chen Wei-lin was quiet for a long moment. Who's telling you what to say on this call? He asked. Nobody, she said. Another pause. Who approved the new governance framework? I wrote it, she said. Mr. Kang approved it. And the credit attribution system? Also mine. He looked at her through the screen. The specific look of a person conducting their own assessment without intermediaries in real time. Send me the full documentation package, he said. The governance framework, the attribution system, the FIU filing. I want to read it personally before I bring it to my board. It's already in your inbox, she said. I sent it 20 minutes ago. A pause. Then something shifted in his expression. The faintest adjustment, the beginning of something that wasn't quite trust, but was the precursor to the consideration of trust. I'll be in touch, he said. He was in touch. The renegotiation took 3 months. Careful, detailed, with Chen Wei-lin's team examining every element of the new structure with the thoroughness of people who had learned an expensive lesson about assuming thoroughness on the other side. It was not smooth. There were 2 sessions where positions hardened and the tone in the room became the kind of cold that signals a relationship approaching its limit. Nia sat through both without retreat. She answered every challenge with documentation. She acknowledged every legitimate concern with specific structural responses rather than general assurances. She did not oversell. The partnership agreement was signed on a Friday afternoon in a room in Seoul with Chen Wei-lin present in person and 3 international witnesses. He crossed the room after the signing and shook Nia's hand, not the formal handshake of the beginning of the renegotiation, but the different kind, with both hands, the kind that means something. The woman who wrote that governance framework, he said quietly, she understood what had been done, not just the mechanics of it. Yes, Nia said. She did. He nodded once. Then he turned and shook Tae-hyun's hand, and the room moved on to the next thing the way rooms do. The internal documentation channel and the external consultancy took 8 months to build properly. Nia built them concurrently with her work as lead strategic advisor in the early mornings and the late evenings, in the same spaces where she had once built proposals that disappeared into other people's presentations. She hired 3 people, one from an external legal firm specializing in whistleblower protection, one a data system specialist who could build the secure infrastructure, one a young woman named Aiko who had left a comparable organization after a 3-year experience that Nia recognized in its specific details, with the particular recognition of a person who has been in the same territory. Aiko interviewed well, but what made Nia hire her was the moment in the interview when Nia asked what she wanted the work to accomplish, and Aiko said, without hesitating, I want the next person who's in the situation I was in to have somewhere to go that I didn't have. That's it. That's the whole answer. Nia hired her the same day. The consultancy launched quietly, with a small announcement in the industry press that described it as an independent advisory service specializing in organizational transparency infrastructure. It did not describe its origins. It did not need to. On the evening of its launch, a Thursday, 10 months after a rain-drenched night when a woman had carried a resignation letter into a building and taken the elevator to the wrong floor, Nia was at her desk on 32, finishing the last of the day's administrative work, when Tae-hyun appeared in her doorway. He was in his jacket, which was unusual at this hour. He was generally in his office well past the point when the building's social architecture required the jacket. He had 2 cups of something hot from the executive floor kitchen. He set one on the edge of her desk without asking whether she wanted it. She looked up. Come see something, he said. She followed him not to his office but to the end of the corridor. The far end, past the assistant station, to a door she had walked past many times and assumed was a storage room or a utility access point. He opened it. It was a stairwell, and the stairwell went up one short flight to a door that opened onto a rooftop terrace she had had no idea existed. The terrace was not large. A railing around the perimeter, some weathered furniture that looked like it had been up here for years and largely forgotten, and beyond the railing, Seoul in every direction, the city spread out in the particular density of its nighttime architecture. 1,000,000 lit windows and the distant thread of the river and the mountains at the edges where the city ran out and the dark began. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and clean in the way Seoul air gets in November, when the weather has done what it came to do and moved on, leaving something scrubbed behind. She stood at the railing and looked at it. He stood beside her, not close in the way that required management or acknowledgement. Just beside her, with his coffee cup in his hand, looking at the same view. I used to come up here when I was a child, he said. My father's office was this building. I came with him sometimes, on weekends, when he had work and no one to leave me with. I found the door by accident. A pause. I'd sit up here and watch the city and think about what it would be like to understand what all of it was for. Did you figure it out? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. I figured out the mechanics of it, he said. The what and the how. The why took longer. Another pause. I'm still working on the why. She looked at the city, the river catching the ambient light and giving it back in a different form. The mountains patient and enormous at the edges. I owe you an accounting, he said. She turned to look at him. I told you, in this building, that I had been watching what was happening to you for over a year, that I was building a case. He was looking at the city, not at her. What I didn't tell you, what I should have told you, and chose not to because the timing was never right, and then the urgency of everything else made it feel like a thing that could wait, is that I didn't begin watching because I was building a case. I began watching because I saw you. In a meeting, 3 floors below this one, 18 months before you came up to this floor. You were at the edge of the room, someone else was presenting your work, and you were listening with the expression of someone who had stopped expecting anything different, but was still keeping track. She said nothing. I watched you keep track, he said, for 18 months, every meeting, every report, every instance, and I built the case because the watching wasn't enough. I needed it to be more than witnessing. I needed it to result in something. He paused. But I want you to know that the case came after. The scene you came first. The city hummed below them. A siren somewhere, blocks away. The specific noise of a place that doesn't stop. She looked at his face, at this man who had built his competence into a fortress, and then discovered, apparently, that fortresses are cold in ways that have nothing to do with temperature, and that the person he had watched for 18 months keeping her own record with her own hands had walked into his office with a letter and changed the architecture of something he hadn't known needed changing. You should have said something sooner, she said. Not angrily, just the truth, plainly. Yes, he said. I know. The 18 months mattered. Yes, he said. They did. She turned back to the city. I'm not leaving, she said, in case that's what you're worried about underneath all of this. He was quiet for a moment. Something in the quality of his quiet changed, like a thing that had been held under tension being allowed, carefully, to ease. I know, he said, but I needed to say it to you directly, not as part of a strategy session, not with a purpose attached to it. She nodded. She understood the distinction. She had spent a significant portion of the last 10 months operating in a world where everything had a purpose attached to it, where words and silences and positioning were all instruments of something larger, and she understood the specific weight of a statement that was only itself. They stood at the railing for a while. The city did what it did, indifferent and enormous and in its own way, because cities don't have the option of anything else, continuous. Nia drank her coffee, which had gone slightly cool and tasted in the cold night air like something simple and adequate and exactly what it was. I want to redesign the lobby, she said. He looked at her. The history display, she said. The photographs. It goes from the building's construction directly to your grandfather, then your father, then you. There's no one else in it. No one who built anything in this company who wasn't a Kang. She paused. That needs to change. This company was built by a lot of people. The lobby should look like it. He was quiet for a moment. You want to put people in the lobby. The people who built things, she said, with their names on them. Yes. My grandfather put the photographs in the lobby. Your grandfather is dead, she said, and you're in charge. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression that she had come to recognize, the specific look of a man recalibrating towards something, not surrendering to it, not being swept by it, but choosing, deliberately, to move. All right, he said. The lobby redesign took 2 months. Nia drove the process herself, working with the building's management team and an external design firm she selected on the basis of a portfolio that prioritized clarity over ornamentation. The new display ran the full length of the main lobby wall. The building's history, yes, and the founding family, but also the people. Engineers, strategists, administrative staff, project leads, the woman who had managed the Singapore office for 11 years, and whose operational work had underpinned 3 of the company's most significant international partnerships. People identified by name and contribution in photograph, the record of what had actually been built, and who had actually built it, laid out in a long, honest line where anyone walking through the main doors could see it. On the morning it opened, Nia stood in the lobby and looked at it. The security guard with the thermos, his name, she had learned months ago, was Officer Cha, and he had worked the morning shift in this building for 16 years, walked past on his way to his station. He stopped and looked at the new display. Then he looked at Nia. Different, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at the display again. His eyes moved along the names, the faces, the long human account of what this building had been made from. Better, he said. He went to his station. She went to the elevator. Tae-hyun was already in his office when she arrived on 32. He was at his desk reading something, and when she came in, he looked up. And the specific thing in his expression when he looked at her was the same thing that had been building for 10 months, through evidence files and midnight tea and 11 days of preparation and a rooftop in November. Something that had moved from assessment to acknowledgement to something she did not have a single word for but recognized the way you recognize a city you've seen from a height before you've ever walked its streets. She sat down across from him. She put the small notebook on his desk, the one from her bag, the one with 31 documented instances written in her own handwriting, the one she had kept because the truth needed to be held by someone. She had been carrying it for years, and she set it down now, on his desk, in his office, 32 floors above the city. I don't need this anymore, she said. He looked at it, then at her. The record is in better place now, she said. Official places. Places that can't be buried. She held his gaze. I don't want to carry the evidence of the theft for the rest of my life. I'd rather carry the work itself. He looked at the notebook for a moment. His hand moved toward it, slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone who understands the weight of the object in front of them. And he picked it up. He held it in both hands the way you hold something that has served a purpose so long and so completely that the object itself has become a record of the holding. What do you want to do with it? He said. Keep it somewhere, she said. Not destroyed, just somewhere that isn't on me. He put it in the top drawer of his desk. He closed the drawer. She looked out the window, his window, with Seoul behind it, gray and enormous, and today, for once, without rain. The city was clear and bright and ordinary in the way that cities are ordinary when you are not looking at them through the pressure of a specific emergency, when you are simply looking at them as the place where you live and have chosen, with full awareness of what that choice cost and what it returned to remain. I have 3 meetings this afternoon, she said. I know, he said. I have 4. The Singapore team wants a call on the framework implementation. I'll be done by 3, he said. She stood up. She was at the door when he said her name, her actual name, not Ms. Brooks, the name she had been hearing him use more often in recent months, the name that meant the professional geography between them had, through 10 months of evidence and cost and shared weight and a cold night on a rooftop, arrived somewhere that didn't have a title. Nia. She turned. He looked at her from his desk in the clear morning light of a city that had stopped raining, with the notebook in the drawer and Seoul behind the glass, and everything that had been broken now repaired in the particular way that things are repaired when the repair is honest. Not seamless, not invisible, but solid. The seams part of the structure, rather than evidence of its weakness. The lobby is good, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. The warmth of it. Not performed, just present, just real. The specific warmth of 2 people who have stood in the same storm and come out on the same side. Yes, she said. It is. She walked out. The elevator took her down through 32 floors. She came out into the lobby and walked through it, past Officer Cha and his thermos, past the new display with its long, honest account of the people who had built things, past the place on the wall where the resignation letter had been heading on a rain-soaked night 4 years and 5 weeks ago, and out through the main doors into the cold, clear Seoul morning, where the city was going about its business with the absolute indifference of a place that has never once needed a story to be anything other than what it was. She had work to do. She went to do it.